thank you all for having me here. Thanks to Reverend Arvel and Reverend Kimberly, all of you. On the home front, many thanks to my wife, Wendy the Weaver, and to my son, Ashton Ray, who today is being the Weaver's assistant during the big Verde Valley Open Studios event, which is going on even while I'm here. As she would say, flyers in the back. Okay. So, in his provocative 1930 paper entitled Cosmic Religion, a lot of you have heard of it, Albert Einstein proposed what he called a new and higher level of religious experience, which he called cosmic religion. A religion not involving an anthropomorphic idea of God, but rather, and these are his words, delighting in the nobility and marvelous order which are revealed in nature and the world of thought. So on August 20, can't believe it's 3 months ago, I gave my first talk here at Center of Universal Light about how Judaism is evolving toward this third and highest level of religion. I followed this up with a workshop that several cool members, including Reverend Arvel, attended. And today I'll share some of what we covered in that workshop with the rest of you. And if you would like to learn even more about Cosmic Judaism, again, see the flyer in back. There's going to be another workshop on December 2nd. So clearly, Judaism, like all major religions, is in a time of transition. A new form of Judaism is emerging to deal with this rapidly evolving cyber-driven world that we all live in. And so Einstein's concept of cosmic religion, it's a very interesting paradigm to use in exploring just what this new stage of Judaism might look like. I find the writings of Rabbi Arthur Green, particularly his 1992 masterpiece called Seek My Face, Speak My Name, a contemporary Jewish theology. I find his work to be a trailblazing effort on this trajectory heading toward a cosmic Judaism. Now, Rabbi Green describes himself as a neo-Hasidic Jew. His writings are both provocative, and he's such a poet, very evocative of the direction which Judaism needs to evolve and is already evolving. So the Hasidic movement, as I'm sure many of you know, was an 18th century Jewish spiritual movement. It both simplified and popularized Jewish mysticism for the poverty-stricken Jews of Eastern Europe. So Neo-Hasidism, which is the lineage that Rabbi Green believes himself to be part of, is a very modern descendant of this 18th century movement. And as Rabbi Green writes in a lovely article entitled Awakening the Heart, the God of this religion is not the commanding other who rules over history, nor the God of reward and punishment. Rather, God is found in the still small voice that calls us to open our hearts and turn our lives toward goodness. This sort of new mystical piety turns toward the natural world as a source of inspiration, seeing existence and beauty as objects of wonder and devotion. This makes it especially appropriate to the 21st century, when religion's most vital task may be that of transforming our attitude toward the natural world and working to preserve it while we can. Rabbi Green nicely sums up the thoughts he presents in Seek My Face, Speak My Name as a heterodox mystical theology of Judaism. Approximately halfway through the book, Rabbi Green states his purpose as follows. I proceed from the premise of seeking a mature and believable Jewish faith based on an ultimate commitment to a non-dualistic vision of the universe. I seek to remain faithful to an understanding that the portrait of the king or queen, our image of God, is a mirror of the self, and that each of our self-portraits is a mirror of the one, that is to say, of God. Appropriately, the book begins by asking how and why we should express our wonder at the sheer richness of being, the vastness of the universe, the great gift of life. Why express it in religious language at all? Why do Jewish theology or any other theology in the first place? There are many other approaches to reality that are perhaps equally valid. However, Rabbi Green feels that there are powerful reasons to follow the path of Jewish prayer and Jewish theology, in dealing with the living universe around us. For Rabbi Green, as for many other Jews, the language of sacred tradition, shrouded in mystery and awe, as he puts it, is a way to express our gratitude and wonder at the very miracle of existence. It is not the only way, but it is a way that, when we do it just right, can work for us today. So why the religious approach? Why the Jewish tradition? As Rabbi Green expresses it so beautifully, it is in the course of our spiritual search that we turn to the wisdom and language of religious tradition. Through the profound echo chamber of the countless generations of its faithful, it offers us a way to express both the longings and the fullness that we know within. The language of sacred tradition, shrouded in mystery and awe, comes to seem like the appropriate vehicle through which to express the same feelings with regard to life itself. Precisely because the language of tradition so reaches into antiquity and is so enriched by the lives of all those generations that have lived within it, it has a depth that words of our own simply cannot reach. So the body of Seek My Face, Speak My Name is divided into 4 parts, one for each letter of the sacred, unpronounceable name of God, printed in most Bibles as the Lord in small caps. Or as Rabbi Green would have it, this is the name that we have given to God. In naming God, we make the bold claim that, even within the limitations imposed by our human consciousness, we are capable of knowing God at all. By giving God a name, by saying thou to the faceless cosmos, we give a face to the reality and the mystery that lives behind, within, and beyond everything we know. Created in God's image, we in turn project an image of God that is comprehensible to us, an image that we can wrap our hearts and minds around, an image that we find emotionally satisfying. As Rabbi Green observes a little later in the book, frightened by our own mortality and ultimate powerlessness, we cannot live with a faceless God. We need a God to whom we can cry, with whom we can argue, whom we can trust and even love. For us humans, such a God needs to have a human face. This face is our gift to God. Being only human, we can do no more, and yet it is enough. And there's nothing wrong with this, as long as we don't confuse our projection with the reality behind it. We get to have our spiritual cake and eat it too. We experience God as a person, even while being aware all along that God is so much more than that, and also not really a person at all. We enjoy the comfort of anthropomorphism while not taking it too seriously. So part 1 of the book is entitled Yod, or Y, for the first letter of the divine name, and is subtitled God and the Ways of Being. Its first section, The Secret of the Shema, describes the quintessential Jewish prayer. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Hears it as a cry beyond worship, almost beyond words, a cry addressed not to God, but to Israel, to ourselves, to those around us, to all who struggle to understand. Rabbi Green adopts the Kabbalistic imagery that views the first line of the Shema as the higher unity, the inner gate of oneness. Viewed from the perspective of the absolute oneness of God, everything else, including our own brief lives, seem unreal, or at least insubstantial. Only infinity is real here at this first gate. But the second line of the Shema, blessed is the name of God's glorious kingdom now and forever, represents the lower unity, the outer gate, the one within the many. It describes the world of infinite change and infinite variety in which we live, a very concrete and physical world in which, nevertheless, each flower, each blade of grass, each human soul, is a manifestation of divinity, a new unfolding of the cosmic one. So our religious task, says Rabbi Green, is to see through to the oneness of these two truths, to recognize that the one beyond and the one within are the same. We are then charged to create a human community that lives and witnesses an ongoing response to that insight. And he continues, that is what it means to be a Jew, which in the broader sense means anybody who struggles with God. That's our task, nothing less. So the second section is called God Above, God Within. And it contains a really perceptive discussion of what Rabbi Green calls the myth of verticality, the root metaphor of Western understanding of the relationship between God and the world. All our childhood images of that white-bearded God clutching a thunderbolt up there in heaven. All our stories of Moses going up the mountain to receive the Torah from a God who comes down the mountain partway to meet him. All our descriptions of spiritual progress as climbing the rungs of a cosmic ladder. All these conceptions and imaginings reflect this persistent myth of verticality. So Rabbi Green suggests that it is time, if not to abandon this myth of verticality, which is so deeply rooted in our tradition, but at least to put this metaphor in perspective. He says we can do so by replacing, or at least supplementing, the myth of verticality with the image of inner and outer. He says, let us think of our journey to God as a journey inward, where the goal is an ultimately deep level within the self, rather than the top of the mountain or a ride in the clouds. So spiritual growth in this metaphor is a matter of uncovering new depths rather than attaining new heights. Perhaps we could even think of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, as having been given at the deepest level of inner encounter, rather than from the top of the highest mountain. The mountain serving as a vertical metaphor for an inward event. Or, as he so vividly pictures it, the Torah tells us that our earliest ancestors were diggers of wells. Let us try to reach that understanding that flowed as water from the depths of Abraham's wells, rather than one that came down carved in stone from the top of Moses' mountain. The third section, the 2 and the 1, summarizes this as follows. God and world are different faces of the same reality, different modes of the only being there is. He continues, faith in the one that is the source and core of all, the unity that defies and transcends all separation, has long existed within Judaism, masked with the metaphors of duality. Our age needs a clear articulation of this faith. It's time for Jewish non-dualism to emerge from hiding. It's time to admit that the parental, royal, and pastoral metaphors that we have inherited, beloved as they are not adequate for describing the relationship between God and the world as we experience and understand it today. Despite all the horrors of Jewish history, Jews still keep praying. We want to sing to the universe, to recount its beauty, to celebrate the life that goes on after all. Despite what the words say, our prayer is not quite addressed to the other who creates, commands, and saves. Our prayer is a cry and a song to life itself, called forth from our own innermost self, addressed to the wonder and mystery of life that we have dared to call again by the ancient and holy name of God. The language remains that of monotheism. There is no God but you. But the content with which we fill these words goes much further. There is nothing but you. We, along with the rest of the universe, are also part of the you that we pray to. All is one. God is within us and around us and beyond us, all at the same time.
Part 2, Hey, the letter H, is subtitled Creation. Its second section, Creation and the Jewish Question, joyfully acknowledges the fact that most Jews are not particularly attached to the literal truth of the creation story in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, the first of which was borrowed from the Babylonians anyway, because it was the most sophisticated creation model that was then available in the ancient Near Eastern world. As I tell my daughter when she makes fun of the opening verses of Genesis, if the Bible were written today, its first words would be, in the beginning was the Big Bang. And the story would proceed from there according to today's scientific model. And of course, even fewer Jews have any problem with the concept of evolution than with acknowledging that the creation story of the universe was very different from what's described in Genesis. On the contrary, says Rabbi Green, we see evolution itself as the greatest of ongoing religious drama. The history of our universe is the ongoing account of how the unpronounceable Holy One, the source of life, reached forth into the world of form, became manifest in the infinite variety of species, and finally became articulate in us, in the consciousness and language of humanity. No blind process is this, but rather the great striving of the one to become manifest in the garb of the many. Religion and science do not have to be in conflict. Cosmic Judaism will revel in ongoing scientific discoveries about how our beautiful bodies, world, and universe are put together. It will never feel challenged or threatened by these new discoveries. As Rabbi Green elaborates on the topic of our love for creation, a piety that proclaims the love of God without showing it by a love for the world is theologically self-contradictory. It is the natural world that embodies the only God we know. The tale of creation achieves its fulfillment in acts we undertake to make our appreciation of divinity real by the way we live. The needs of the world are so great and so urgent that they cannot be adequately addressed only by a life of personal piety. Purification to create a spiritual elite, a holy elite, but that does nothing to help the world survive. That won't work today. Rather, we humans are the quality of compassion. We are the vessels through which compassion is added to God's power of judgment. The flow of life as we experience in our everyday lives is morally blind. But Jews can give, and we as Jews can give more than sufficient testimony to that sad fact. But as humans, we are here to direct that flow of life, to lead the divine energy in the world in the direction of compassion. Part 3, Vav, letter V, third letter, is titled Revelation. In its 6th section, Revelation and the Inward Journey, Rabbi Green makes a powerful statement of his radical religious non-dualism as follows. He writes, the human-divine encounter is more like the breaking down of a wall than the building of a bridge. It is discovery that there is no chasm, rather than a claim that the gap can be traversed. Finally, it's the realization that the wall itself was illusory, and the sense of separation lay only in our unreadiness to know the deepest truth. Its 8th section, the role of covenant, a reinterpretation, Rabbi Green applies his non-dualism to the covenant at Mount Sinai. If the wall between human beings and God is an illusion, then covenant, too, becomes a commitment to keeping faith with the deepest self that is manifest in us. He amplifies this statement beautifully by asking later on the same page, is not the God within us who chooses, is it not the God within us who chooses to hear the voice of God. How profound. Its ninth section, Revelation and Torah, deals with the tension between religious intention and religious form. On the one hand, he states that the essential forms of tradition are indeed holy and must be followed, not because God dictated them from the mountaintop, but because the Jewish people, using its own sacred energy, declared them holy to its God. He continues, the Jewish people has invested the forms of its devotional life with boundless emotional and spiritual energy over many generations. The intensity with which a form is used as a vessel of spiritual life grows and builds throughout each generation of devotion to it. The forms may not have been given by God on Mount Sinai, but they are what we bring to the mountain. We invest them, and we associate them with the holiness that we encounter there. In its 10th section, Revelation, Will, and Law, Rabbi Green struggles with the difficult issue of how to get from his very untraditional concept of revelation to binding commitments to Jewish law. This is a struggle because, as he acknowledges, I do not know of a God who commands specific religious behavior or forms of worship. Rather, this new halakha is a term for Jewish law, but it is actually more like the term Tao. It means the walk, it means the way you live, not a set of rules. He says, so this new Jewish law, this new halakha, rather than viewed as the specific will of God, will be understood as a human divine embodiment created by Israel in which real holiness is contained. Once again, Rabbi Green proposes a theology that is very different from the image of a white-bearded God issuing literal commandments from the top of a mountain in the desert with poor Moses frantically struggling to take dictation. And so in its 11th section, the personal path, accepting the yoke, Rabbi Green discusses, without advocating, his own personal religious path and how he encounters God. Rejecting the powerful, commanding God who shapes history, the presence that remains within the religious forms is the still, small voice of our people's deepest inner self. The God I know is a divinity who cannot act or be realized in the human world at all except through human action. He poignantly concludes, I let myself hear the pleading voice of the one that has so long inhabited our tradition and then asks not to be abandoned by yet another one of Israel's children. And finally, part 4, Hey, the second letter H of the four-letter YHWH divine name. Toward the end of it, in a section called Messiah, Actor or Herald, Rabbi Green states that messianic faith is made real for us, not by endless generations of patient waiting, but by doing the work of redemption day by day. This echoes the famous teaching of Rabbi Tarfon, who lived from approximately the year 70 to 135 of the Common Era. You are not obligated to complete the work of creating the world, but neither are you free to desist from it. Or as I love to say, we do the best we can with what we have to work with. And that's good enough. So thank you. Hope to see some of you at the next workshop. And in a moment, we will go into meditation mode. Thank you.
Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. To see you high and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing, holy, holy. stars, for all of creation. God is creator, all in all, leading us to shine His light.
May the Eternal One's face light up to you and be gracious to you. Yisaronai panavelecha. May the Eternal One's face lift up to you. V'yasem lecha shalom. He give you wholeness, happiness, and peace. Shalom, shalom, shalom. V'yasem lecha shalom. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Wholeness, happiness, and peace. Thank you all so much, and may God, or whatever else you imagine, portray, or picture the divine presence, be with you now and always. Amen.